So my name is Stephanie Pest. My pronouns are she, her, and I live in Essex, Ontario, Canada. I have been working in the automotive industry for 37 years. I was born a assigned male at birth. Nobody asked me anything as a baby, and the only thing that doctors assign sex with is your private parts. Nobody asked me if I was transgender, which I found out later in life, but much later in life, that I am a transgender woman. My identity became known to me when I was 46 years old, which was 12 years ago. However, when I was 7, I realized that I just didn't fit into a boy role as in society. That was a struggle for me for my entire life until I discovered that I was trans. I would seek out women's clothes just to express myself in a female way, which was very helpful in my understanding of who I am. And I was born in the 60s, so society at that time frowned upon something other than what you see. Through puberty, it became more intense that I wasn't really a male, and it was difficult to, function. And that was never revealed to anybody. Went through all the male rituals, pretty much pretending, but that was expected of me, a young teenage boy, then later a man. It was expected of me to marry a woman, have children, and so forth. And through all that time, it was a struggle. It was like something I thought I would have to live with forever, which was very despairing. But then internet came and you find out things that you're not alone, that other people are struggling too. So my gender identity as a trans woman became evident to me. My bell was rung, and you can't unring a bell. So I am married, and I told my wife that moment I found out. She looked at me and she said, "My dear, I knew that." She knew before I did. And she became very, very supportive of me. It was very difficult for both of us to go through that process, but it's very, very critical that you have this communication between partners that you're sharing your life with. That was the key to our success in our marriage. We are still married, and we love each other so much. So coming out as a trans woman was not immediate. This was back in 2008 when I realized that I was a trans woman. And what to do? What is the next step? Next step was I need to transform my body. So you search for ways to do that. I chose to do things on my own because I was not sure society would accept who I am authentically. And so I didn't go to a doctor, and I decided to self-medicate with phytoestrogen. These are herbal pills that they mimic estrogen, and they were helpful because before that, I was, because of my depression, I would have antidepressant drugs, and they never ever worked. But when I started taking phytoestrogens, it seemed to make, a change. A change occurred, a good change. I felt more content with myself, but it was not enough. I always wanted more. And so it came to a point where I did have to go to a doctor, and they prescribed pharmaceutical estrogen. I went to see an endocrinologist who I had been seeing before because I suffered from prolactinoma, which is a tumor in your pituitary that produces prolactin, which is a female hormone that women produce when they're pregnant. So it was an indicator that maybe, yes, this is for sure valid. My identity is a woman. When I started those estrogen, that hormone therapy, I noticed a magnificent change. I became more content with myself, and my life changed dramatically. But I was still not out to the world. I was only out to my wife, Michelle, and I have two boys that were in school, and we were in an empty nest situation. And so it was easy for me to be Stephanie at home, but in the world, in the society, I was still my former male self. It came to a point where I did feel confident enough to come out. I came out to my children. My oldest was married, so there were three, and we got them together, and this was on a Victoria Day in 2016 that I came out to them, and they were very supportive. But when they discovered that I had known I was trans back in 2008, they became sad because I had to hide this from them. In hindsight, I probably didn't have to. I knew that I had the love of my children and that they would be supportive. And then I decided, I must do more, always more. And I started electrolysis and laser treatments to remove my facial hair, my body hair, to be more feminine. Yeah, so the beginning of my coming out actually had a signal that I was ready to come out. There was a survey produced at our plant that wanted to find out about the makeup of our workforce, male, female, religion, and all that stuff. And so when it came down to the form saying, your gender, I kind of was wondering what to put there. I wasn't completely out, so I decided to go see our women's advocate, which was unusual for a male to go see somebody like that. But they were very, very supportive, and I didn't know if I was the first one that came up with this, but they told me that it was perfectly fine to put whatever I feel comfortable putting on that form. So I made a new line and I put trans woman, and that felt so freeing to do that, exposing myself to a survey, which is a private matter. So, but for me to do that was a big step. And that was actually only a month before I told my kids. And I think that might have been the trigger that I was ready to come out and face the world as Stephanie, a trans woman. So then I decided to actually come out on my birthday, July 7th. Went to the commissioner here in Ontario. It's required to give an oath to say that you are changing your name, changing your gender, and I did that on my birthday in 2016. I came out to my co-workers at Chrysler. A few weeks after that, we had a shutdown, and I told them the day before that when we come back from our vacation, that I will have transformed from a male to a female. And I had much support from my coworkers, and I was gladdened by that. That was another stigma that we have in the trans community, that were not accepted. And I was very, very fortunate that the people around me supported me in that way. So the other thing, while I was at the Women's Advocate and discussing my gender identity with them, they told me that I was not the first. There was a trans man that had come out maybe a year before I did, and they suggested that I contact this person because they were running a peer-to-peer support group for trans people in Windsor called Trans Spectrum. And I was shocked, I was overjoyed that there was somebody else that was going through the same thing I am. And so I decided to reach out to this person and attend these meetings that they had. I think it was once a month that we would go to, and other trans people would come, and we would relate our experiences being trans in our community. And that was the start of a wonderful friendship. It also was the beginning of my advocacy, because listening to other trans people, and this was my first exposure to other trans people, I had no exposure previous to that at all. And I was amazed at how privileged I am that I didn't go through some of the discrimination and prejudice that most trans people experience. My decision at that point was I have a voice that may help my own community, my new community that I'm a part of, that I could speak and have that courage to do that for others that do not have that ability, with the privilege, the white privilege that I have, the privilege of a really good job, a loving, supportive family. This is not a common occurrence in our trans community, and that needs to change. In our trans community, we have people that are not able to speak for themselves because of the stigma that we face in society right now. We are dependent on the majority of the population, which is the cis population. Those are people that are assigned a sex at birth and are content with that, as opposed to trans people and gender diverse people that are not. We need the cis population to educate themselves. We need them to advocate and become allies for the trans community at levels that most people don't wish to do, to protect the most vulnerable in our society. I'm not just talking about trans people, but the people living with disabilities. There are so many people that require these barriers to be taken down so that our society can flourish. I am so happy to be a part of the family that I am in. My wife, Michelle, has been by my side since the very beginning of my trans journey. And I want to thank her for being such a loving partner to me. And my children, Michael, Courtney, Patrick, that they have been so supportive of me. And they still call me Dad, because that's who I am. And I can't express it enough how much love I have for them, that they are part of my journey. I would like to say that through my coming out only 5 years ago, that the people that I have met, I have created an extended chosen family that has shown me love and respect of who I am. And I would like to thank them from the bottom of my heart. And I know that those people have gone forward and been allies to our trans community. I would wish that would grow exponentially, and that would change the way we see the trans community now in society. That we should be accepted as the people we are. We are human, just like everyone else.